Magnus opens with e4. We have the Sicilian. Knight to f3 and pawn comes up to d6. Is Nihal going to play the Najdorf? Let's see. Magnus plays the open Sicilian. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes, and the knight comes out to f6, attacking the pawn. Magnus defends it, and yes, we have the Najdorf, and Magnus plays rook g1. A very interesting move. The idea is to play g4, but you don't really move your rooks like this in the opening. This is a line that has been played before quite some time, but it's not as popular. Knight c6 played by Nihal. He plays right in the center, and that's a good way to continue. Magnus goes g4. Now it's a pawn sacrifice, but it shouldn't be taken because take, knight takes is met with knight d5. And if you take with the bishop, there is take, check here and bishop b5. So all these tactics need to be known, and of course Magnus knows them. g6, that's why was played by Nihal. Pawn moves up to g5. And now Nihal has to move his knight. He goes to h5. Magnus's opening has worked out pretty decently as Nihal has spent 30 seconds for the first 10 moves. He goes bishop g7, and now Magnus can attack the knight on h5. He can also play queen d2 and prepare long castling. Nihal has opted for this dragon type setup with his bishop on g7, putting pressure right in the center. And Magnus goes bishop e2. He's attacking this knight here, and now Nihal has some decisions to make. Where is his knight going? Well, one way to continue here is to take, bishop takes, and then push your pawn to e5, and that would be very interesting. Look at this line: take. Instead of taking e5, bishop goes back and then bringing your knight to f4, and black seems to have a decent position. But right now Nihal is thinking, and he's down to 1 minute 54 seconds. Well, he takes. That's a good decision. Bishop takes, and now you should play e5. No, but he takes here. This is not a good idea. He does play e5, and his idea is now to plonk the knight on f4. But Magnus has a brilliant move here, which is to play queen b4. Now, why is the queen so much better here? It puts pressure on d6, it prepares long castle, and then it also puts pressure on b7. So instead of coming back to d2, queen on b4 is what Magnus needs to find, and he finds it. Of course he's going to find it. He is the best player in the world. Queen b4 is an excellent move. Nihal now brings his knight in, but Magnus says, I'm going to long castle. How are you defending this pawn? Playing king e7 is not at all a good idea. I just play bishop c4. So Nihal has some very big concrete issues to solve. This is problematic. Also, knight takes e2 is just met with knight taking back. So big issues here. Also, time wise, Nihal down to 1 minute 20 seconds. You can see Magnus feeling that he has the advantage and that he can bring this full point home. What should Nihal do here? He's known as the master trickster. He needs to trick the best player in the world right now. Will he be able to do it? Well, he brings his bishop out, and now Magnus should take the pawn. This is a very nice juicy pawn, and after queen e7 comes this beautiful move, queen c5, attacking the e5 pawn, which is not at all easy to defend. So taking there is a good idea, but no, Magnus blunders. He plays bishop g4. Now, this is actually a very smart move because Magnus did not want this bishop here. So after take, he sees no way that this pawn can be defended. So that's his plan. But Nihal has a brilliant move here, which is queen takes pawn and putting a pressure here. If you take the bishop and attack my queen, I give double check and take your queen. This is all very complicated calculation because after you take the queen, he takes the queen. Will Nihal be able to find queen takes g5? He's down to 34 seconds. He needs to make his move. He's calculating. Well, this is his chance. And with 26 seconds left, Nihal makes the decision. He takes the pawn. What a move by Nihal Sarin. And you can see Magnus Carlsen freezing there. He hadn't seen this move. He thought he would simply take the bishop and there's no good discovery. But now he's begun to calculate. He's shaking his head there. He's unhappy. Nihal Sarin back in the game. Look at his focus there. He knows that he has managed to trick Magnus Carlsen. What an interesting move, Queen G5. Now what does Magnus do? Well, he doesn't have too many options. If he takes the pawn here, Black will simply castle. And if he takes here, there is Knight D3 check. But he needs to find something in that variation. So Bishop takes Bishop. I give a double check here. Then you move the king. I take your queen. You take the rook. You take the queen. I take the bishop. You take the pawn. Well, it's some 5-6 moves deep calculation, which Magnus can of course do it. I mean, he can do such calculations, but I don't think he's happy anymore because the opening worked like a charm for him. And suddenly Nihal is back. He takes the bishop on e6. Nihal gives the check. King goes to b1. Nihal picks up the queen. Magnus also takes it. And now rook takes, and Nihal very quickly castles. Rook goes back, defending this pawn on f2. And now a mistake by Nihal because rook d8. Now rook b6 is possible, attacking the knight and the pawn. Instead, knight c6 was much better. He finds it. Knight comes back. He takes the pawn. Magnus still a pawn up, but Nihal gets his rook to the 7th heaven. Now, both his rooks are beautifully poised. Also, the knight is coming into the game. So, Nihal is playing on compensation here. He knows that he has the play. Magnus comes. Rook b6, good move, attacking the knight. The knight moves into the center of the board. He takes the pawn here on a6. Magnus 2 pawns up. Nihal chops off another pawn. Rook takes c2. Has been played, and now rook b6 played, defending the pawn on b2. And now what does Black do here is the question. Magnus has an extra pawn. He's also planning to push his pawn here. So if you take rook takes f2, then after I take the a pawn is extremely strong. So Nihal goes rook a8. His plan is that now you can go rook b7, cutting the king off, and white is better here. Later on you can start pushing your h pawn down the board. But Magnus down to 20 seconds. Nihal has 11 seconds. What is Magnus Carlsen going to play next is the question. He goes a4. And Nihal brings his king in. Very smart decision. The king will be well placed on the f6 square, just keeping control of the position. But Magnus's time, look at it. He's down to 9, 8. Magnus needs to move. He's taking too much time. He's a bit under pressure. King moves up. He takes the pawn on h7. But what is Nihal going to do next? Brings the rook here. Knight comes here. So now if you take the knight, I take your rook. So Nihal brings his rook away to the side. He has 8 seconds. Magnus has 6 seconds here. He plays his rook to h6, putting pressure on the g6 pawn. Nihal takes the knight. And now look at Magnus's clock. 3, 2, 1. Oh, he was almost going to lose on time. And now we have a repetition incoming, it seems. Because if he just does not repeat, then Nihal's rook will come in here and they will attack the b2 pawn. So Magnus agrees to a draw. What a game that was. Nihal Sarin managing to hold his own against Magnus was epic. Both of them shaking his head. And here bishop g4. Magnus says he just didn't see that he should have just taken the pawn on d6. Bishop g4 wasn't a good idea. And what a game that was. And I really love how Nihal and Magnus are analyzing after the game. Also, Magnus has had great respect for Nihal in general. The arbiter comes in and stops both of them from analyzing because the other games are going on. And well, the first ever over the board encounter between Magnus and Nihal ends in a draw. And I'm sure Nihal would be happy with the result because he was under pressure the entire game. But as we know him, the master trickster tricked the master.